Everyone saw the steam curling from my coffee mug that morning, but no one knew why my hands had started to shake. It was just after 7, the lake still wearing its thin shawl of mist, when I heard the sharp, staccato click of high heels on cedar planks. That sound didn't belong here. Not in the quiet Sarah and I had once dreamed about, not on the dock I'd built plank by plank in her memory. Brenda Thornfield came into view like a storm system dressed in designer fabric. Clipboard in one hand, violation notice in the other, she stopped in front of me as if she'd just discovered an oil spill. "This eyesore is ruining our property values," she snapped, thrusting the paper toward me. "You have 48 hours to remove it or we'll take your house." I just looked at her. The dock beneath us had weathered 2 brutal winters. The cedar smelled faintly sweet in the cool air. Every bolt had been turned to spec. This wasn't just wood and fittings. It was the last project Sarah and I had sketched together before cancer took her. The place I still talked to her ghost. The place where, on our anniversary, I let her ashes drift into the water she loved. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "you might want to check those property lines again." She didn't know it yet. No one did. But this wasn't just my dock. It was my water. All of it. Let me back up. My name's Garrett Morrison. I'm 58, retired after 3 decades of designing bridges and water systems that worked the way they were supposed to. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah lost her fight with cancer. 18 months of treatments and hope and fear gone in a breath. We'd spent her last good week sketching the dock on graph paper between chemo appointments. She'd made me promise to build it, even if she wasn't there to see it. "You're too stubborn to let some lake beat you," she'd whispered, smiling that tired smile of hers. When I moved to Millbrook Lake Estates, I thought I was buying a quiet place to heal. 47 homes, pristine water, a place where neighbors waved instead of calling code enforcement. The dock project saved me. 6 months of precise engineering, every permit filed, every inspection passed. The county inspector called it art disguised as infrastructure. Then Brenda arrived. Imagine if a real estate headshot came to life and started running your neighborhood. 52 years old, perfect blonde highlights, a smile sharp enough to open a bank vault. Her husband, Rick, ran a construction company that specialized in overpriced mediocrity. Within 8 months, she'd charmed her way into the HOA presidency, replacing a board of retirees who thought adults could manage their own property. Her first mission, waterfront structure standardization. Translation, all docks identical, all built by Rick's company. She glanced at my paperwork like it had been scribbled in crayon. "Permits don't supersede community standards," she announced, standing in my driveway with that diamond ring flashing in the sun. "This industrial eyesore damages our aesthetic harmony." Industrial eyesore. My handcrafted cedar dock curved with the shoreline like it had grown there. But Brenda wanted floating plastic platforms, triple the cost, half the craftsmanship, and somehow half the neighborhood already had them. The violation notice fluttered in the lake breeze, carrying the scent of her perfume mixed with the diesel exhaust from Rick's pickup. $500 a day if I didn't remove it within 72 hours. They'd even file a lien on my house. She said it with the confidence of someone who thought HOA bylaws outranked state law. That night, I sat alone on the illegal dock, listening to water lap against the posts. A loon called across the lake, wild and unbothered by HOA politics. I remembered something Sarah used to say. When bullies pick on engineers, they usually regret it. Time to find out exactly what I'd bought. The next morning, I walked into the county assessor's office with a fresh cup of coffee and an engineer's determination. Dolores Martinez had worked that desk since the Reagan years. She knew every odd property case in 3 counties. When I told her about Brenda's ultimatum, her face lit up. "Riparian rights," she said, pulling a magnifying glass from her desk. "Haven't seen those in years. Most people think lakefront ownership ends at the shoreline. But certain old deeds, rare ones, give the owner the right to use the water itself, build docks, launch boats, control water access. Dolores dug through the archives, disappearing into a back room for 20 minutes. When she came back, she was holding manila folders that smelled like old books and dust. "Mr. Morrison," she said, spreading papers across the counter, "your property comes with some unusual history. In 1923, my great-uncle Theodore Morrison had convinced the county to let him dam a creek and create this lake as part of a flood control plan. In exchange, he kept perpetual water management authority, rights that passed down with the land. I didn't just own my dock, I owned the lake. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Brenda hadn't just overstepped. She had no authority here. But the real question was, how would she react when she realized the man she'd tried to bully could legally shut down every boat, dock, and swim ladder on this water? And maybe, just maybe, she'd find out sooner than she expected. Everyone in that cramped community center knew Brenda liked a fight, but they'd never seen her face someone who came armed with the one weapon she couldn't shout down. Facts. The room smelled of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, that faint tang of boredom mixed with unease. 15 neighbors sat in folding chairs, staring at the projector Brenda had set up like she was unveiling a NASA mission. Across the wall, in big red letters, the first slide screamed, "Protecting our investment, the dock crisis." She stood at the podium, all business in her pressed blazer, clicking through photos of my handcrafted cedar dock next to images of rusted collapsing piers from God knows where. "This non-compliant structure threatens our property values," she announced, her voice dripping authority. "The HOA has clear authority to regulate all waterfront structures under our community covenants." Her brother-in-law, a lawyer with a $1,000 suit and a Rolex he kept checking like he was billing by the minute, nodded gravely at every word. I sat in the back, calm on the outside, my mind replaying Dolores's words about Theodore's water rights. My fingers tapped the edge of a manila folder in my lap. Inside was a century's worth of legal protection that Brenda couldn't touch, though she didn't know it yet. I waited until she finished her speech and invited comments. That's when I stood. The scrape of my chair against the tile was loud enough to make 3 heads turn. Slowly, I walked forward, boots heavy on the worn linoleum, and set my folder on the podium. "According to county records," I said evenly, "my property includes perpetual water management authority, dating back to when this lake was created in 1923, which means the HOA has no jurisdiction over my dock, my shoreline, or anything else on this water." Silence. Except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, the kind that always hum like an angry wasp. The lawyer's expression shifted from smug to startled in less than a second. "That's impossible," he said. "Community covenants supersede." "They don't," came a voice from the back. It was Margaret Morgan, a retired real estate attorney. She stood, adjusting her glasses. "Riparian rights typically predate HOA formation and remain valid regardless of community agreements. If what Mr. Morrison says is documented, then he's correct." Brenda's face went red enough to match the violation notice she'd pinned to my door 2 days ago. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "One selfish homeowner can't hold our community hostage." "I'm not holding anyone hostage," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm exercising the same property rights you'd want to protect if you had them." 2 board members glanced at each other, looking uncomfortable. One muttered something that sounded a lot like, "Maybe we jumped the gun." Brenda tightened her grip on the podium. "We're hiring a real attorney to challenge these so-called documents. This community will not be bullied by outdated technicalities." I didn't bother responding. My point had landed. The meeting dissolved into whispered conversations and side glances, neighbors filing out with expressions ranging from curious to impressed. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. Gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way to my truck. That's when Margaret appeared beside me like a shadow. "Garrett," she said in a low voice, "I helped research this HOA's formation years ago. I think there are issues with how they incorporated. If they didn't account for existing water rights, this could be bigger than your dock. Bigger." That word stayed in my head as I drove home under the stars. 3 days later, Brenda made her next move. Flyers appeared in every mailbox, glossy, professionally printed, probably costing more than my monthly electric bill. In bold letters, protecting Millbrook Lake from legal manipulation and property value destruction. The emergency meeting she called for Saturday morning drew more people than a 4th of July barbecue. The community center was standing room, only buzzing with the kind of tension you could taste. Brenda had turned the place into her personal courtroom, complete with another PowerPoint, a larger projector, and her brother-in-law front and center. "This homeowner is using fabricated documents to undermine legitimate HOA authority," she declared, her voice louder than necessary. I stayed at the back again, listening. Her lawyer, let's call him Mr. Expensive Suit, followed with his own warning. "These alleged riparian rights are outdated technicalities with no bearing on modern governance. The HOA retains absolute authority. It was a performance. All rhetoric, no evidence." And that's when I realized Brenda had made a mistake, a big one. She'd spent all her energy trying to discredit me without bothering to actually research the law. The following morning, I was back at Dolores's desk in the county records office. "I want everything," I told her. "Maps, contracts, engineering, reports, the works." She disappeared into the archives like a woman on a mission. An hour later, she returned with a stack of folders so thick I had to use both hands. The paper smelled faintly of must and history. "Your great-uncle Theodore," she said, "wasn't just building a lake. He was solving the county's entire flood problem." The old maps and agreements told the story. Spring floods had ravaged 3 townships a century ago. Theodore proposed a dam, an overflow channel system, and a retention lake. In exchange, the county gave him not just the land, but exclusive authority over every creek, stream, and drainage ditch feeding into the watershed. Dolores flipped to a page in a leather-bound ledger. "And here's the part you'll like. The county's been paying annual water management fees into a trust account. Current balance, $847,000. I stared at the number. Brenda was threatening me with $500 a day in fines, while I sat on nearly $1 million in inherited funds. Driving home, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a defense anymore. I had leverage, real leverage. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread out like a battle map. My late wife's photo sat at the edge, her smile steady in the lamplight. "Looks like we've got some work to do, Sarah," I murmured. Because if Brenda wanted a war over the water, she was about to learn what it meant to fight someone who actually owned it. The sound woke me before the sun, a sharp, splintering crack like a tree limb snapping under the weight of ice. I was halfway down the stairs when Jake, my neighbor, started pounding on the front door. He was still in his bathrobe and slippers, eyes wide. "Garrett, you gotta see this." From the kitchen window, I saw the damage. My dock, Sarah's dock, looked like it had been mauled by a grizzly bear with a grudge. One corner was gone completely, cedar boards floating like toothpicks in the early morning light. And bobbing just offshore, engine idling like a smug cat, was Rick Thornfield in his boat. He waved. Actually waved. "Mechanical failure," he shouted. "Throttle got stuck in forward. Real sorry about the damage. I'll help you clean it. Up?" "Sure." And the Easter Bunny moonlights as a demolition contractor. I walked barefoot down to the shoreline, every splinter in the debris reminding me that this wasn't just lumber. It was where Sarah had planned to sit with her coffee, where I'd scattered her ashes. The smell of diesel mixed with the cold, clean scent of the lake made something hard settle in my chest. Rick had picked the exact spot we'd planned for her memorial bench. Out of the whole dock, out of every inch of shoreline, he'd hit that. In engineering school, they teach you to recognize patterns. Someone threatens your property on Monday and accidentally destroys it on Wednesday? That's not coincidence. That's a plan, a stupid one. And here's the thing about being an engineer. We document everything. While Rick probably spent the morning high-fiving Brenda over breakfast, I spent mine installing security cameras and making a few phone calls. 30 years of professional connections meant I could pull favors most people couldn't dream of. By the time I'd replaced the damaged section of the dock with fresh cedar, the kind that smells like determination, Margaret called with news that made Rick's little stunt look like a misdemeanor. "Garrett," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "I've been digging into the HOA's incorporation documents. They never filed proper water rights research. State law requires any waterfront HOA to document existing riparian rights before claiming authority. They skipped that step entirely. I stopped mid-swing, hammer frozen above a nail. English translation? This HOA has been operating illegally for 15 years. She said. Every fee they've collected, every regulation they've enforced, legally void, they've been pretending to own authority they never had. While she explained, I noticed the rumble of an engine. Rick's boat again, this time with Brenda on board. She sat stiff-backed beside him, designer sunglasses flashing in the afternoon sun, watching me like a general studying enemy fortifications. "Doc's looking good, Morrison," Rick called, his voice all fake cheer. "Real shame about that mechanical problem. These old engines, you just can't trust them, you know?" I didn't answer. My cameras were already capturing every second, and the footage from earlier was safe on a hard drive. The next day, my insurance company called. Rick had already filed his incident report, a creative writing masterpiece claiming he'd heroically tried to avoid a collision despite a catastrophic throttle malfunction. His story was so rehearsed it could have been on Broadway. That's when I made 3 calls of my own. First, to Tom Rodriguez, a marine mechanic who owed me for a bridge inspection job years back. Second, to Detective Collins from the County Water Patrol. Third, to Patricia Valdez, a water rights attorney Margaret swore could make HOA bullies cry. Maritime sabotage? Patricia laughed when I told her the situation. "That's a new one for my resume, but if you can prove intentional damage to property protected by federal water rights, we're talking serious criminal charges." Friday morning, my little Justice League assembled at the dock, the insurance adjuster, Detective Collins, Tom with his toolbox, and enough documentation to choke a bureaucrat. Tom crouched by Rick's throttle assembly, muttering under his breath. Then he looked up, eyes hard. This wasn't mechanical failure. Someone modified the throttle so it would stick in forward gear, fresh tool marks all over it. Detective Collins took photos, her face unreadable. "Mr. Morrison, based on this, will be filing charges for criminal mischief, insurance fraud, and destruction of historically protected property." By sunset, 2 county deputies were escorting Rick away in handcuffs. Across the lake, curtains twitched. Word was spreading fast. That night, Brenda's porch light stayed off. And for the first time since she'd set foot on my dock, I wondered if she finally understood what she was up against. But she wasn't done. Not even close. Because people like Brenda don't retreat. They escalate. And her next move, it was going to make this sabotage look like child's play. By Monday morning, the air around Millbrook Lake felt different, like the static you sense before a thunderstorm. Rick was out on bail, Brenda's SUV had been parked in her driveway all weekend, and rumor had it she'd been on the phone non-stop, with some big city law firm. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she was cooking up. At 10:07 a.m., a process server the size of a refrigerator knocked on my door and handed me a certified envelope so thick it could have doubled as body armor. The return address read, Sterling and Associates, the kind of law firm that charges more per hour than most people make in a week. Inside was a letter so drenched in legal drama it might as well have been written for television. They accused me of systematic document fabrication, conspiracy to defraud community assets, and, my personal favorite, exploiting grief-induced psychological instability to circumvent legitimate governance structures. Apparently, losing my wife meant I was no longer capable of understanding basic property law. Who knew widowhood came with automatic legal incompetence? The demands were clear. Remove my dock immediately, pay $47,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees, and issue a public apology for disrupting community stability through fraudulent claims. Deadline, 72 hours, or they'd file federal fraud charges. I was still halfway through the second paragraph when my phone rang. Patricia Valdez. Her voice was bright with amusement. Garrett, their lead attorney just called me wanting to discuss reasonable settlement terms before reviewing your documents. I mentioned federal water rights, 90 years of county payment records, and then I counted 30 seconds of silence before he asked if we'd accept a nuisance settlement to avoid costly litigation. She laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. But Brenda wasn't going for quiet legal maneuvers. She was going public. By 3 p.m., her first Facebook post went live. Fellow residents, we face an unprecedented threat from someone exploiting personal tragedy to steal community assets. That was followed by a neighborhood app rant, and then, because she couldn't resist, a professionally lit YouTube video filmed in her own kitchen. In the video, she leaned against her marble countertop like a TV anchor, speaking in that slow, careful tone politicians use when they want you to think they're reasonable. This man, she said, gesturing vaguely off camera, is clearly struggling with grief-related mental health issues, and we must protect ourselves from those who would manipulate our compassion. Jake sent me screenshots of the comments section. Some neighbors ate it up, others weren't buying it. One person suggested I was part of an organized crime syndicate, specializing in hostile HOA takeovers. Another speculated Patricia and I were secretly married and running an insurance scam. The entertainment value was high, but so was my determination, because Brenda had forgotten one key thing. Not everyone in this community was gullible. Margaret's quiet property rights coffee meetings had grown in popularity. She'd started with 3 people at her kitchen table. Now she was packing her living room every Thursday night, educating homeowners about the difference between real property rights and HOA marketing fiction. And then came the twist. Dr. Lisa Morgan's official watershed assessment arrived in the mail, printed on County Engineering Department letterhead. It was a masterpiece. In precise technical language, it documented that Theodore's flood control system had prevented an estimated $47 million in downstream damage over 9 decades. His engineering was still protecting thousands of homes every spring. The county engineer's office, now fully aware of who actually controlled their critical infrastructure, sent me a formal letter recognizing my hereditary water management authority. They also wanted a meeting to discuss collaborative maintenance planning. Brenda, in true form, responded with her second catastrophic mistake. She called the State Environmental Agency and accused me of illegally manipulating public water systems for personal gain. When the inspector arrived Friday morning, I knew within 30 seconds that Brenda had just stepped on a legal landmine. Her name was Sarah Delgado, mid-40s, ponytail. The kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd chased off more than a few liars in her career. She spent 4 hours inspecting Theodore's dam system, reviewing logs, and testing water quality with equipment that looked like it had been borrowed from NASA. Her verdict was simple. This is the finest private water management system I've inspected in 20 years. Whoever's maintaining it deserves recognition, not investigation. When she discovered that Brenda had filed a fraudulent emergency report, her voice went cold enough to freeze the lake solid. Ma'am, false environmental emergency reports carry serious penalties. Our legal department will be contacting you. But the Thornfields were nothing if not persistent in their bad decisions. Rick, maybe feeling left out of the spotlight, decided to start a neighborhood safety patrol. His code for parking outside my house to take photos, following me, to the hardware store, and documenting my suspicious habit of drinking coffee on my own dock. Even my mail carrier noticed. "You got your own paparazzi now?" he joked as he handed me the water bill. Rick's surveillance circus was so busy watching me, they didn't notice when Patricia's process server handed them harassment restraining orders. By Sunday night, Brenda's PR campaign was crumbling, Rick was staring down criminal charges, and my legal position was stronger than ever. But Brenda wasn't built to back down. She was about to do something so desperate, so spectacularly reckless, that it would turn this neighborhood feud into a full-blown federal case. By Monday morning, Brenda had officially shifted from neighborhood nuisance to full-scale bureaucratic arsonist, her latest stroke of genius, filing an emergency petition with the county, claiming Theodore's dam posed imminent catastrophic risk and demanding it be seized under eminent domain. Translation: if she couldn't steal my water rights through HOA intimidation, she'd try to get the government to do it for her. The county engineer who showed up Tuesday morning looked like he'd been dragged out of retirement against his will. His name was Tom Hendress, and his weathered ball cap and sunburned neck told me everything I needed to know. This man had seen more infrastructure than Brenda had seen Instagram filters. He ran a hand along the dam's concrete, eyes narrowing with appreciation. "Son, this is some of the finest flood control engineering I've seen in 40 years, he said. "Your great-uncle knew what he was doing. For 4 hours, he inspected every bolt, valve, and drainage channel. His official verdict, written in the kind of bureaucratic poetry engineers love, read, 'This infrastructure exceeds all current safety standards and appears to have been maintained to museum-quality specifications. That alone should have been the end of it.'" But Brenda wasn't satisfied with wasting just one agency's time. That afternoon, she launched what I can only describe as bureaucratic carpet bombing, filing simultaneous complaints with the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the State Water Authority, the County Health Department, and even the Department of Homeland Security. Her claim? That I was operating illegal industrial water processing facilities that posed a threat to regional security. The following week, my property looked like a scene from a disaster movie, a parade of inspectors in federal windbreakers carrying clipboards, cameras, and the weary expressions of people who desperately wanted to be somewhere else. One by one, they reviewed Theodore's dam, checked my logs, tested the water, and one by one they came to the same conclusion: immaculate maintenance, flawless engineering, zero violations. The EPA inspector even asked if she could use Theodore's design as a training model. "This is textbook watershed management," she said, snapping photos of the overflow channels. "Whoever built this understood hydrology better than most of our current contractors." Brenda, of course, wasn't in the mood for textbook praise. She needed something, anything, to justify her emergency. That's when Rick decided to help. Wednesday night, my security cameras caught him and two of his construction buddies sneaking up to the dam's overflow system with bolt cutters. They worked under the dim glow of a flashlight, apparently convinced they could create a real safety issue to validate Brenda's claims. The footage was so clear it could have been a training video on how not to commit federal crimes. There was Rick, leaning over the safety rails, cutting cables that controlled floodgate operations. His buddies stood on lookout, sipping from convenience store coffee cups like they were pulling the night shift on mall security. At dawn, I called, "Detective Collins." She arrived with backup, reviewed the footage, and shook her head. "Mr. Morrison, this isn't vandalism. Sabotaging flood control infrastructure during spring flood season is federal terrorism. We're talking 20 years minimum. By 9 a.m., Rick was in handcuffs, flanked by county deputies and 2 agents from the FBI's terrorism task force. If Brenda had any sense, she would have gone silent right then. But sense had never been her strong suit. That afternoon, she called a press conference. Not a neighborhood meeting, but an actual press conference in her driveway. She'd printed statements, set up a podium, and summoned every local media outlet within a 50-mile radius. The morning air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. Cameras rolled as she declared, "My husband is the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. This Morrison character has corrupted government agencies, fabricated historical documents, and orchestrated a criminal enterprise to steal our community's water assets." When a reporter asked for proof, she said, with absolute confidence, that the evidence was being suppressed by corrupt federal agents who were obviously part of the conspiracy. By 6 p.m., the video had gone viral on the local news. Brenda, standing in her driveway, accusing the FBI of helping me steal water. Rick, sitting in a federal holding cell, facing charges that made his earlier dock stunt look like a parking violation. And somewhere under all that noise, I could feel the momentum shifting. The tide was about to turn. And when it did, Brenda wouldn't just lose her grip on the HOA. She'd lose everything she'd built her petty little kingdom on. Thursday night felt like the county fair had come to town. If the main attraction was watching an HOA president get dismantled in front of a live audience. The parking lot outside the Millbrook Lake Community Center overflowed with cars. Local TV vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Inside, every folding chair was taken, and people leaned against the walls or stood shoulder to shoulder in the back. The air buzzed with anticipation, and the smell of industrial-strength coffee from the concession table a teenager had set up as an impromptu business. Even folks from other neighborhoods had shown up, curious about the water rights war that had been making the rounds on social media. A few YouTubers were live streaming to audiences that had apparently never seen a middle-aged widower take on an HOA president, armed with nothing but historical documents and common sense. Council Chairman Robert Hayes banged his gavel and called the emergency session to order. He had the expression of a man who'd signed up to talk about sewer budgets but had found himself hosting a soap opera. "We're here to address the Millbrook Lake water rights dispute," he said, his voice firm. "We have representatives from the county attorney's office, the state environmental agency, and the Federal Water Management Bureau to provide testimony." Brenda rose from her seat like a general heading to battle. She wore a power suit, in a shade of crimson that almost matched her earlier temper, and clicked her heels across the linoleum with the rhythm of a countdown clock. The one attorney she had left, a pale, nervous man who looked like he'd rather be defending jewel thieves, trailed behind her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice ringing with false conviction, "we are here because one man's elaborate fraud scheme has disrupted our peaceful community and corrupted multiple government agencies." She clicked her remote and a PowerPoint flashed onto the wall, charts, arrows, and bold text alleging that my water rights were forgeries, that the inspections were part of a coordinated cover-up, and that I'd somehow bribed federal agents to suppress the truth. Then she made her biggest mistake yet. She brought Sarah into it. "This man," she said, pointing directly at me, "has exploited his wife's tragic death to generate sympathy while systematically stealing community assets through an elaborate confidence scheme." The room shifted. Even some of her staunchest supporters stiffened, the line in the sand suddenly visible. County Attorney Michelle Rodriguez stepped up to the podium next, a thick leather briefcase in hand. Her tone was measured, but the weight behind her words could have cracked concrete. "We have conducted a comprehensive investigation into Mr. Morrison's claims. Every document has been verified through federal archives, state historical records, and county engineering files dating back to 1923. She laid the evidence out plainly. Theodore's water management agreements were legitimate. The county had paid water management fees into my trust account for 70 years. The HOA had never secured water rights authorization when it formed, making 15 years of its waterfront regulations legally meaningless. Furthermore," she continued, Mrs. Thornfield has filed 14 false reports with various agencies over the past month, wasting thousands of taxpayer dollars and federal resources. Her husband is currently facing terrorism charges for attempting to sabotage critical flood control infrastructure. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then Sarah Delgado from the EPA took the microphone. I have inspected Mr. Morrison's water management system extensively. It represents some of the finest private watershed stewardship in the region. Claims of environmental danger are not only false, they're deliberately fraudulent. If that wasn't enough, Dr. Lisa Morgan delivered the final blow. She presented her comprehensive watershed assessment, pointing to decades of data. Theodore Morrison's flood control system has prevented an estimated $47 million in downstream damage over 9 decades. Continued stewardship of this infrastructure is critical to regional safety. The HOA's interference has threatened public safety. When Chairman Hayes finally asked if I wanted to respond, I stood slowly, the manila folder in my hands suddenly heavier than paper should feel. "Folks," I began, scanning the crowd, "I didn't ask for this fight. I just wanted to honor my wife's memory with a dock we designed together. But when Mrs. Thornfield turned grief into a weapon, she forced me to defend rights I didn't even know I had." I opened the folder and held up the county's official recognition of my water management authority. This isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility. I inherited the duty to protect the infrastructure that keeps your homes safe from flooding. And I take that seriously. The applause started at the back and rolled forward like a wave, swelling until the chairman had to call for order. Brenda sat frozen, her once confident smile gone, her attorney staring at the table like it might offer him an escape hatch. I didn't know it then, but this night was the tipping point. The Thornfield's empire was crumbling, and in just a matter of weeks, the wreckage would be complete. 6 months later, the lake was quiet again. But the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has stripped away everything rotten. The Thornfields were gone. Rick was serving 18 months in federal prison, his trademark smirk replaced by an orange jumpsuit and a schedule dictated by corrections officers. The charge sheet read like the world's worst resume: insurance fraud, destruction of historically protected property, attempted sabotage of critical flood control infrastructure, and the one that would haunt him, federal terrorism. No parole until he'd served the full term. Brenda hadn't stuck around to watch the walls close in. 3 days after the town hall meeting, she put her house on the market. The sale price was so low it practically screamed desperation, and within a month, she'd vanished to some unsuspecting community 3 states away, clipboard in tow. The emergency HOA election that followed was the first real taste of democracy Millbrook Lake had seen in years. Margaret Morgan won the presidency unanimously. Her first act was to stand in front of a packed meeting room and issue a public apology, not just to me, but to every homeowner who'd been bullied, fined, or otherwise strong-armed under Brenda's reign. "I promise you," she said, voice steady, "harassment will never again masquerade as community standards in Millbrook Lake Estates." And she meant it. What happened next was the kind of transformation most neighborhoods only dream about. Using Theodore's $847,000 trust fund, matched by federal grants Patricia helped secure, we launched the Millbrook Watershed Conservation Trust, a nonprofit dedicated to maintaining and upgrading Theodore's century-old flood control system. We replaced aging valves and reinforced spillways, installed automated monitoring stations, and built new wildlife habitats along the shoreline. The county environmental department started calling it the gold standard for private watershed management. But my favorite part of the plan had nothing to do with infrastructure. On the exact spot where Rick had rammed the dock, we built the Sarah Morrison Memorial Environmental Learning Center, a cedar and glass structure overlooking the lake. Kids come there on field trips to learn about water cycles, flood control, and the importance of preserving natural resources. There's a teaching pier where they catch and release fish, their laughter carrying across the water on warm spring mornings. Sarah would have loved it. We even started the Theodore Morrison Environmental Engineering Scholarship, awarding $50,000 each year to students who want to study watershed science, civil engineering, or environmental law. The first 3 recipients came back after graduation to work on our system, closing a circle Theodore probably never imagined when he stood on that creek in 1923 with his first set of blueprints. Property values climbed by more than 20% once. Word got out that this wasn't just a pretty lake. It was a piece of functional history, still saving homes from flooding a century later. National media took notice. CNN ran a Good News Friday segment about us. The Wall Street Journal profiled the public-private partnership, and every year now we host the Millbrook Watershed Festival, part science fair, part community celebration. Local businesses line the shore with booths, kids race canoes, and live bands play into the evening. People come from 3 counties away to see what can happen when a community stops fighting each other and starts working together. Jake started his own construction company, specializing in environmentally responsible waterfront projects. His business card reads, "Quality work, fair prices, no corruption." It's a quiet dig at Rick, and his waiting list stretches 6 months. And me? Every morning, I sit on the memorial dock with my coffee, watching great blue herons stalk the shallows, and osprey dive for fish. The automated monitoring systems hum softly, invisible to most, protecting thousands of homes downstream. Sometimes I tell Sarah about the festival, the scholarships, the way kids' eyes light up when they realize science can save a whole town. I think she'd be proud that her final dream became the foundation for something neither of us could have imagined. The lake holds more than water now. It holds proof that ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary bullies, that property, rights, and environmental stewardship can work together, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something that lasts. Some mornings, the lake looks exactly as it did the first time Sarah and I stood here together, a glassy sheet of blue, the mist rising like smoke from an unseen fire. I cradle my coffee and watch the sunlight spill across the water, and for a moment I almost expect her to be standing beside me, pointing out the way the osprey dive like arrows into the shallows. But she's here in other ways now, in the hum of the monitoring systems we installed, in the chatter of school kids learning how floodgates work, in the laughter of neighbors who no longer look over their shoulders for a clipboard-wielding tyrant. This dock, our dock, is more than cedar and bolts. It's proof that when you fight back against arrogance with patience, preparation, and the truth, you can change an entire community. Brenda and Rick wanted to erase it, to erase me. Instead, they helped create something permanent. The Sarah Morrison Memorial Environmental Learning Center will outlast all of us. The scholarship program will fund the next generation of engineers and conservationists long after my boots stop crunching on this shoreline. And the Millbrook Watershed Conservation Trust will keep protecting thousands of homes every spring, just like Theodore intended when he first sketched his dam in 1923. Sometimes the strongest victories aren't the ones shouted from a podium. They're the quiet mornings when you look out at something whole and know it stayed that way, because you refuse to let it be broken. I've learned a few things since Brenda first set foot on my dock. That the loudest voice in the room isn't always the one telling the truth. That history has a way of defending itself if you're willing to dig deep enough to find it, and that dignity doesn't come from never being challenged. It comes from standing your ground when it matters most. For anyone watching this, here's my challenge to you. Before you accept an HOA's word about your rights, read your deed. Before you believe someone who says, "That's just the way it's always been," ask to see the paperwork. Because buried in those pages might be the key to your freedom or to protecting something bigger than yourself. I never asked to control the waterways of an entire county. I never wanted to be the guy who took on an HOA president and sent her scrambling across state lines. I just wanted to keep a promise to my wife, and in keeping it, I learned something else. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to fight, like hell, for the future. So the next time someone tells you what you can't do, remember this lake. Remember that one stubborn man and a stack of century-old documents stood up to a whole system built on intimidation, and won. Because the fight against petty tyrants never really ends. But neither does the satisfaction of watching them face the one consequence they can't outrun: the truth. Now, tell me your story. Where are you watching from? And what's the HOA nightmare you've been too afraid to share? Because I promise you, the more we talk about it, the less power they have. And who knows? Maybe the next great water rights war. We'll start with someone watching this. Coffee in hand, looking out over a piece of land they suddenly realize is worth fighting for.